The summer heat was beating down hard when 17-year-old Jake stepped out of his mom's old Honda with his younger brother Alex. It was one of those perfect Saturday afternoons when most teenagers would be hanging out at the mall or playing video games, but these two brothers had something different in mind. They had been planning this visit to Premier Auto Gallery for weeks, and today was finally the day. Jake had just gotten his acceptance letter to college, and his 18th birthday was coming up next month. His parents had promised him something special for this milestone, and after months of research, he had his heart set on getting his first real car. Not just any car, but something that would last him through college and beyond. Alex, who was 16 and equally passionate about cars, had volunteered to come along as moral support, and because he genuinely loved everything about automobiles. The two brothers had spent countless hours watching car review videos online, reading automotive magazines, and even visiting car shows around the city. They knew more about horsepower, fuel efficiency, and safety ratings than most adults twice their age. Jake had a notebook filled with specifications, price comparisons, and financing options that he had carefully researched over the past few months. As they walked toward the gleaming glass building of Premier Auto Gallery, both boys felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. The dealership was known for having some of the finest cars in the city, from luxury sedans to high-performance sports cars. The building itself looked impressive with its modern architecture and spotless windows that reflected the afternoon sun inside the showroom. The air conditioning provided instant relief from the heat outside. The polished floors were so clean you could see your reflection, and the cars were positioned like pieces of art in a museum. Jake's eyes immediately went to a sleek blue sedan that he had been researching online for months. It had all the features he wanted, excellent safety ratings, and was within the budget range his parents had discussed with him. Alex was equally mesmerized by a red sports car nearby, though he knew it was way beyond what they were looking for today. Still, he couldn't help but admire its design and imagine what it would be like to drive something like that someday. The brothers moved through the showroom slowly, taking in every detail and discussing the various models in hushed, respectful tones. What they didn't notice was that they had already caught the attention of someone across the room. Rick Henderson, the sales manager, had been watching them from the moment they walked in. With over 15 years of experience in car sales, Henderson prided himself on being able to size up customers within seconds of meeting them. In his mind, he had already categorized these two young visitors. Henderson saw two teenagers in casual clothes. Jake was wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans, while Alex had on a hoodie and sneakers. To Henderson, they looked like typical kids who had wandered in to waste time looking at cars they couldn't afford. He had dealt with plenty of teenage window shoppers over the years, and in his experience, they rarely turned into actual buyers. The sales manager continued to observe them from a distance, growing more irritated as the minutes passed. He watched Jake pull out his notebook and point to various features on the cars, talking animatedly with his brother. To Henderson, this looked like nothing more than two kids playing make-believe, pretending they were serious buyers when they were obviously just there to look around. After about 10 minutes of watching, Henderson decided he had seen enough. He straightened his tie, put on his most condescending smile, and walked over to where the brothers were examining the blue sedan that Jake was interested in. The approach was immediate and dismissive. Henderson didn't introduce himself properly or ask how he could help them. Instead, he launched into what felt like a lecture about how the showroom wasn't a playground and these weren't toys for kids to gawk at. Jake, who had been expecting a professional greeting and helpful service, was taken completely off guard. He tried to explain that they were serious about making a purchase, that his 18th birthday was coming up, and that his parents had already discussed budget and financing options with him. He even showed Henderson his notebook with all the research he had done. But Henderson wasn't interested in listening. He glanced at the notebook dismissively and made it clear that he didn't believe a word Jake was saying. The sales manager's tone became increasingly condescending as he suggested they should probably look at used cars down the street instead, somewhere more appropriate for their obvious budget limitations. Alex tried to support his brother by mentioning that their father owned a successful business and that they weren't just casual browsers. This only seemed to amuse Henderson more, who actually laughed out loud at the suggestion. His response was sarcastic and insulting, making it clear that he thought the boys were making up stories to try to seem more important than they were. The situation continued to escalate as Henderson's behavior became more unprofessional. Other customers in the showroom began to notice the commotion, and some of the other sales staff started looking over with curiosity. Jake felt his face burning with embarrassment as Henderson's voice got louder and more dismissive. The final blow came when Henderson decided that the boys had wasted enough of his time and the dealership's resources. He called over to the security guard and suggested that these young troublemakers should be escorted out before they bothered any real customers. The word troublemakers stung particularly hard because Jake and Alex had been nothing but respectful and polite throughout the entire encounter. The security guard, who seemed uncomfortable with the situation, approached hesitantly. He could see that the boys weren't causing any real problems, but Henderson was his boss, and he felt obligated to follow instructions. The guard politely but firmly asked the brothers to leave the premises. Walking out of that dealership felt like the longest walk of Jake's life. Other customers stared as they were escorted to the door, and he could feel his cheeks burning with humiliation. Alex was equally upset, but more angry than embarrassed. He couldn't believe that someone could treat potential customers so poorly, based solely on their age and appearance. As they reached the parking lot, both brothers were quiet for a moment, processing what had just happened. Jake had been looking forward to this visit for weeks, and the reality of being treated like a criminal when all he wanted to do was buy a car was hard to accept. The ride home was filled with a mix of disappointment and determination. Jake realized that this experience, while painful, had taught him something important about how some businesses operate and how assumptions can lead to lost opportunities. Alex was already talking about how they should tell their parents about what happened and maybe consider taking their business elsewhere. Neither brother could have imagined that this humiliating experience would soon lead to consequences that would change everything at Premier Auto Gallery. They also had no idea that their father's response to this treatment would become a lesson that Henderson and the entire dealership would never forget. As they pulled into their driveway, Jake looked at his notebook full of car research and smiled, slightly. He was still going to get his car for his 18th birthday, but it definitely wasn't going to be from Premier Auto Gallery. The silence in the old Honda was heavy as Jake turned the key in the ignition. Alex sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window at the Premier Auto Gallery building that had just become the scene of their most embarrassing moment in recent memory. Neither brother spoke for the first few minutes as Jake slowly backed out of the parking space, his hands gripping the steering wheel a little tighter than usual. As they stopped at the first red light, Alex finally broke the silence. His voice was shaky with a mix of anger and disbelief as he asked his older brother if what just happened was real. Jake nodded slowly, his jaw still clenched from the encounter. They had both experienced the same humiliation, but somehow talking about it made it feel even more surreal. Instead of driving straight home, Jake made a sudden decision to pull into a nearby coffee shop parking lot. He needed a few minutes to collect his thoughts before facing their parents. Alex didn't question the detour. He could see that his brother needed some time to process what had just occurred. Sitting in that parking lot, something interesting happened. Instead of wallowing in self-pity or getting angry, Jake's analytical mind began to kick in. This was the same thoughtful approach that had earned him early acceptance to a prestigious business program at college. He pulled out his phone and started doing what he did best: research. Alex watched with growing curiosity as his brother began typing rapidly on his phone screen. When he asked what Jake was doing, the answer surprised him. Jake was looking up everything he could find about Premier Auto Gallery, from customer reviews to business ownership information. He was treating this personal slight as a case study in poor business practices. The first thing they discovered was fascinating. Premier Auto Gallery had dozens of negative reviews online, and many of them told similar stories. Customers complained about being judged based on their appearance, age, or the car they drove to the dealership. One review from a successful young entrepreneur described almost the exact same experience Jake and Alex had just endured. Another review was from a retired teacher who had been treated poorly because she was dressed casually on a weekend. As they read through review after review, a pattern emerged that was both enlightening and disturbing. The dealership seemed to have a culture problem that went beyond just one rude sales manager. Multiple customers mentioned feeling unwelcome, being ignored, or being treated dismissively by staff who made quick judgments about their purchasing power. Jake's business-minded approach to the situation began to rub off on Alex. The younger brother, who had initially just wanted to complain about the unfair treatment, started to see this as a learning opportunity. They began discussing how a business could survive with such consistently poor customer service practices. Their research revealed that Premier Auto Gallery was actually part of a larger dealership group that owned several locations across the state. The parent company had a mission statement posted on their website that talked about treating every customer with respect and providing exceptional service, regardless of background or circumstances. The irony wasn't lost on either brother. Alex discovered something particularly interesting while scrolling through the company's social media pages. Just last month, they had posted about their commitment to serving younger customers and helping first-time car buyers navigate the purchase process. The post had received hundreds of likes and positive comments from people praising the dealership for being forward-thinking and inclusive. This contradiction between their public image and actual behavior struck both brothers as incredibly hypocritical. Jake began taking screenshots and making notes, not because he was planning any kind of revenge, but because he was genuinely curious about how businesses could operate with such a disconnect between their stated values and actual practices. As the afternoon wore on, their research session became more comprehensive. They looked up industry standards for customer service in automotive sales, read articles about successful dealership practices, and even found studies about the economic impact of treating customers poorly. One statistic particularly caught their attention. The average dissatisfied customer tells 9 other people about their negative experience, while satisfied customers typically only share their positive experiences with 3 people. Alex, who had always been good at math, started calculating the potential financial impact of Henderson's behavior. If every customer who was treated poorly told 9 other people, and those stories influenced even a fraction of those people's car buying decisions, the dealership could be losing hundreds of thousands of dollars in potential sales every year. This revelation shifted their entire perspective on what had happened. What started as a personal humiliation was now looking like a significant business problem that the dealership's management probably didn't even realize existed. Jake began to wonder if the owners of Premier Auto Gallery knew how their sales staff was treating potential customers. The brothers also started researching Rick Henderson specifically, though they were careful to stick to publicly available information. They discovered that he had been with the company for over 15 years and had won several sales awards. This made his behavior even more puzzling, because someone with that much experience should have understood the importance of treating every potential customer professionally. As they dug deeper into their research, Alex found an interesting article about generational changes in car buying. The piece explained how younger buyers often do extensive online research before visiting dealerships, sometimes knowing more about specific vehicles than the sales staff themselves. It also mentioned that many young buyers are influenced by their treatment during the shopping process, often choosing to buy from dealerships that make them feel respected and valued. This information resonated strongly with both brothers. Jake realized that his thorough preparation and research had actually made him a more informed customer than Henderson had given him credit for. The notebook full of specifications, price comparisons, and financing options represented hours of serious research, not the casual curiosity of a window shopper. The more they learned, the more they began to see their experience as part of a larger pattern of age discrimination in various industries. They found stories of young entrepreneurs being dismissed by banks, recent graduates being overlooked for jobs despite strong qualifications, and young customers being treated poorly by businesses that assumed they lacked purchasing power. By the time they decided to head home, both brothers had transformed their negative experience into an educational opportunity. Jake had filled several pages in his notebook with observations about customer service, business practices, and the financial impact of poor treatment. Alex had gained a new appreciation for the complexity of business operations and the importance of company culture. The drive home was completely different from the earlier silent trip from the dealership. Now they were engaged in animated discussion about what they had learned and what it might mean for their family's car-buying decision. They talked about the importance of finding a dealership that would treat them with respect, regardless of their age. Jake made a decision that would prove to be significant later. Instead of just complaining about their treatment, he was going to document everything professionally and present it as a case study in poor customer service. His business school applications had required essays about real-world business challenges, and this experience was providing him with first-hand insight into how not to run a customer-facing business. As they pulled into their driveway, both brothers felt something unexpected. Instead of being defeated or angry, they felt empowered by knowledge and motivated to make better choices. They had turned a negative experience into a learning opportunity and were ready to share their research with their parents. Neither Jake nor Alex could have predicted that their afternoon of research would soon play a crucial role in events that would unfold at Premier Auto Gallery. Their methodical approach to understanding what had happened was about to become very important, in ways they couldn't yet imagine. While Jake and Alex were sitting in that coffee shop parking lot researching Premier Auto Gallery, their father David was 40 miles away in his downtown office building, completely unaware of what his sons had just experienced. The 38th floor corner office offered a stunning view of the city skyline, but David rarely had time to enjoy it. Even on weekends, his mind was usually focused on the next business challenge or opportunity. David had started his Saturday morning with a conference call to Tokyo, followed by another call to London, and was now preparing for a video meeting with potential partners in Germany. Running a global technology company meant that weekends were just another workday, especially when you were dealing with clients across multiple time zones. His assistant had left a stack of contracts on his desk that needed review before Monday morning. But David wasn't always the successful businessman sitting in this expensive office. His story began 22 years ago, in a small garage behind his childhood home, where he had started tinkering with computer programming while still in college. His parents had thought he was wasting time playing with computers when he should have been focusing on getting a traditional job after graduation. The breakthrough came when David realized that most companies were struggling with supply chain management. They had all this data about their inventory, shipping, and customer orders, but no efficient way to connect all the pieces together. While other programmers were focused on flashy consumer applications, David saw an opportunity to solve a boring but crucial business problem. His first client was a small local restaurant chain that was losing money because they couldn't track their food inventory properly. They were either running out of ingredients during busy periods or throwing away expired food that they had over-ordered. David created a simple software system that helped them predict exactly how much food to order based on historical data, weather patterns, and local events. The restaurant's profits improved dramatically within 3 months. Word spread quickly through their industry network, and soon David was getting calls from other restaurant owners who wanted similar systems. Within a year, he had quit his day job and was running his software company full-time from that same garage. The real growth came when David realized that his inventory management system could work for any type of business, not just restaurants. Manufacturing companies, retail stores, hospitals, and even government agencies all struggled with the same basic problem of managing their supplies efficiently. His software could save them millions of dollars by reducing waste and preventing shortages. What made David different from other tech entrepreneurs wasn't just his programming skills, but his approach to understanding customers. He would spend weeks working alongside warehouse managers, store clerks, and inventory specialists to really understand their daily challenges. While his competitors were making assumptions about what businesses needed, David was actually listening to the people who did the work every day. This hands-on approach led to some of his biggest discoveries. A night shift janitor at a hospital once mentioned to David that they always seemed to run out of cleaning supplies on weekends, but had too much during the week. That casual observation led David to develop a feature that adjusted ordering patterns based on day-of-week usage patterns. That single feature ended up saving hospitals millions of dollars annually. Another breakthrough came from a conversation with a teenage intern at a manufacturing company. The intern noticed that the computer system was ordering extra parts every time it rained, because moisture was affecting one of the sensors. The experienced managers had dismissed this as a minor glitch, but David investigated and discovered that the same sensor problem was affecting thousands of companies worldwide. The solution he developed became one of his most profitable software features. These experiences taught David an important lesson that would shape his entire business philosophy. Good ideas can come from anyone, regardless of their age, position, or appearance. Some of his most valuable insights had come from people that others might have overlooked or dismissed as unimportant. As his company grew, David made sure this principle was built into the corporate culture. New employee orientations included stories about the janitor and the intern who had contributed million-dollar ideas. The company's suggestion system was designed to give equal consideration to input from everyone, from the CEO down to part-time maintenance staff. This approach had practical benefits beyond just being the right thing to do. David's company consistently outperformed competitors because they were getting insights that others missed. While other tech companies were focused on impressing investors and industry experts, David's team was solving real problems for real people, which led to more satisfied customers and better financial results. David's personal life reflected the same values. Despite his wealth, he drove modest cars and wore simple clothes. He had taught his sons that respect should be earned through character and actions, not bought with expensive possessions. The family lived in a nice but not ostentatious house, and David made sure his boys understood the value of hard work and treating everyone with dignity. This background made David's parenting style quite different from many wealthy parents. Instead of showering Jake and Alex with expensive gifts, he encouraged them to earn what they wanted and to appreciate the effort that went into achieving goals. When Jake had asked about getting a car for his 18th birthday, David had agreed, but only after Jake demonstrated that he had researched the decision thoroughly and understood the financial responsibility involved. David's office phone buzzed, interrupting his preparation for the German video conference. His assistant informed him that the international call had been postponed by an hour due to a technical issue on the other end. This unexpected free time was actually welcome, as it gave him a chance to review some financial reports that had been sitting on his desk for several days. As he opened the first quarterly report, David's mind wandered briefly to his sons. He knew they had planned to visit a car dealership that afternoon, and he hoped they were having a positive experience. Jake had been so excited about finally getting his first real car, and David was proud of how thoroughly his son had prepared for this major purchase. The irony was profound, though David didn't know it yet. While he was sitting in his office thinking about how proud he was of his son's maturity and preparation, those same sons were being treated like troublemakers at a car dealership. The very qualities that David had worked to instill in them, curiosity, thoroughness, and respectful behavior, had been completely dismissed by a sales manager who made snap judgments based on appearances. David's phone showed several missed calls from Jake, but he had been in back-to-back meetings all afternoon and hadn't had a chance to check his messages. He made a mental note to call his sons back after his evening conference call to hear about their car shopping experience. The successful businessman had no idea that in just a few hours, he would be hearing a story that would challenge everything. He believed about fairness and respect in business dealings. The conversation with his sons would remind him why he had built his company on the principle of treating everyone with dignity, and why that principle was about to become very important in ways he couldn't yet imagine. As David turned his attention back to the financial reports on his desk, he remained completely unaware that his sons were conducting their own business research session just miles away, and that their findings would soon become the foundation for a lesson that Premier Auto Gallery would never forget. Sunday evening at the family dinner table was usually a relaxed time for David and his sons, but tonight something felt different. Jake seemed quieter than usual, and Alex kept glancing at his older brother as if waiting for him to speak. David had noticed the tension when he came home from his office, but he figured the boys were just tired from their day out. When David finally asked about their car shopping experience, the floodgates opened. Jake started telling the story slowly, at first then with increasing emotion as he described exactly what had happened at Premier Auto Gallery. Alex jumped in with additional details, and soon both brothers were talking over each other, trying to convey just how humiliating and unfair the whole experience had been. David listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious, with each detail. When Jake mentioned how Henderson had dismissed his research notebook and laughed at their claims about their father's business, David's jaw tightened noticeably. The story of being escorted out by security while other customers stared made his hands clench into fists under the dinner table. But what really struck David was how his sons had responded to the situation. Instead of just getting angry or giving up, they had spent hours researching the dealership, documenting patterns of poor customer service, and analyzing the business implications of such behavior. Jake showed his father the detailed notes he had taken, including screenshots of negative reviews and calculations about potential lost revenue. This methodical approach to understanding what had happened made David incredibly proud, even though he was furious about how his sons had been treated. They had turned a negative experience into a learning opportunity, exactly the kind of analytical thinking he had tried to teach them over the years. After dinner, David retreated to his home office and began conducting his own research. His approach was more comprehensive than his son's afternoon investigation. Using his business connections and professional databases, he started building a complete picture of Premier Auto Gallery's operations, financial situation, and management structure. What he discovered was troubling but not surprising. The dealership was struggling financially, with declining sales over the past 2 years. Customer satisfaction scores were well below industry averages, and employee turnover was unusually high. Several former employees had left negative reviews on-job websites mentioning poor management and pressure to discriminate against customers who didn't look wealthy enough. David also found something interesting in the dealership's corporate structure. Premier Auto Gallery was owned by a larger automotive group that had recently been trying to improve their brand image. They had invested heavily in marketing campaigns about inclusive customer service and treating all buyers with respect. The disconnect between their public messaging and actual practices was stark. By Monday morning, David had made his decision. He was going to visit Premier Auto Gallery himself, not for revenge, but to see firsthand how they treated customers. He wanted to understand whether Henderson's behavior was an isolated incident or part of a broader culture problem. David chose his approach carefully. He dressed in one of his more expensive suits, drove his Tesla Model S instead of his usual modest sedan, and made sure to look like exactly the kind of customer that Henderson would immediately respect. This wasn't about deception, but rather about conducting a controlled experiment to see how differently he would be treated compared to his sons. The Monday morning drive to Premier Auto Gallery gave David time to think about his strategy. He wasn't planning to create a scene or humiliate anyone publicly. Instead, he wanted to have a professional conversation about customer service standards and business practices. His goal was to turn this into a teaching moment for everyone involved. Walking into the same showroom where his sons had been humiliated just 2 days earlier, David immediately noticed Henderson approaching with a completely different demeanor. The sales manager's posture was respectful, his smile was genuine, and his greeting was professional and welcoming. The contrast with how he had treated Jake and Alex couldn't have been more obvious. Henderson began showing David around the showroom with enthusiasm, pointing out features of various vehicles and asking thoughtful questions about his needs and preferences. When David expressed interest in potentially purchasing multiple vehicles for his company's executive fleet, Henderson's excitement was palpable. The sales manager began calculating numbers and talking about volume discounts. David played along with the conversation, asking detailed questions and showing genuine interest in several vehicles. He wanted to see exactly how far Henderson would go to accommodate what he perceived as a high-value customer. The difference in treatment was so dramatic that it would have been almost comical if it weren't so problematic. After about 30 minutes of this professional courtship, David casually mentioned that his sons had visited the dealership recently. He asked Henderson if he remembered meeting 2 teenage boys who had been interested in purchasing a car. The change in Henderson's expression was immediate and telling. The sales manager's face went from confident to confused to worried in a matter of seconds. He clearly remembered the encounter with Jake and Alex, but he was trying to process how those two kids could possibly be related to this well-dressed businessman who was talking about buying multiple expensive vehicles. David watched Henderson's internal struggle with interest. He could see the exact moment when the sales manager realized that he had made a catastrophic error in judgment. The color drained from Henderson's face as the implications of his behavior began to sink in. Rather than becoming angry or accusatory, David maintained his calm, professional demeanor. He simply asked Henderson to describe his interaction with the two young men, giving the sales manager an opportunity to explain himself. This approach was more effective than any shouting or threats could have been. Henderson's explanation was exactly what David had expected. The sales manager talked about how young people often came in just to look around without any serious intention of buying, how his time was valuable, and how he had to focus on real customers. Each word only made his discriminatory assumptions more obvious. David listened patiently, occasionally asking clarifying questions that made Henderson's reasoning sound even more problematic. When Henderson mentioned that the boys didn't look like they could afford the vehicles they were examining, David asked him to explain exactly what a serious car buyer was supposed to look like. The conversation became increasingly uncomfortable for Henderson, as he realized that every justification he offered only highlighted his prejudicial behavior. David's calm questioning technique was far more effective than anger would have been, forcing the sales manager to confront the flaws in his own reasoning. Finally, David revealed his identity and his relationship to the two boys Henderson had dismissed. The sales manager's reaction was a mixture of panic, embarrassment, and desperate attempts to backtrack on everything he had said. Henderson immediately began apologizing and offering special deals, but David could see that the apologies were motivated by fear of consequences rather than genuine remorse. This moment crystallized everything David had suspected about the dealership's culture problem. Henderson's behavior wasn't just about poor customer service, it was about fundamental disrespect for people based on superficial characteristics. The fact that Henderson was now groveling simply because he realized David was wealthy only made the situation worse. David's response was measured and professional but firm. He explained that he wasn't interested in special treatment or discounts earned through his son's humiliation. What he wanted was a conversation with Henderson's supervisor about customer service standards and business practices that affected all potential buyers, not just those who appeared wealthy. The meeting he was about to request would change everything at Premier Auto Gallery, though Henderson didn't realize it yet. David's approach would turn a negative experience into an opportunity for systemic change, exactly the kind of constructive response his sons had learned to expect from their father. The general manager's office at Premier Auto Gallery felt unusually tense as David sat across from Robert Martinez, the dealership's owner and general manager. Martinez had agreed to the meeting immediately after Henderson had nervously explained the situation, though the sales manager had tried to downplay the severity of what had happened. Now 30 minutes into their conversation, Martinez was beginning to understand the full scope of the problem. David had brought printed copies of everything his sons had researched, including screenshots of negative reviews, customer complaints, and employee feedback about the dealership's culture. He presented this information calmly and professionally, letting the facts speak for themselves rather than making emotional accusations. Martinez studied the documents with growing concern. He had been aware that customer satisfaction scores were declining, but he hadn't realized how consistent the pattern of discriminatory treatment had become. Reading review after review of customers who felt judged, dismissed, or disrespected based on their appearance was deeply troubling. What made the situation even worse was the contrast with the dealership's official policies and marketing materials. Martinez pulled out their employee handbook, which clearly stated that all customers should be treated with equal respect and professionalism, regardless of age, appearance, or perceived financial status. The company's recent advertising campaign had specifically emphasized their commitment to serving first-time buyers and younger customers. David listened as Martinez expressed genuine shock and disappointment about Henderson's behavior. The general Manager seemed sincerely unaware of how far the actual customer experience had drifted from the company's stated values. This gave David hope that the situation could be addressed constructively, rather than requiring more drastic measures. However, David also made it clear that this wasn't just about Henderson. The pattern of negative reviews and employee complaints suggested a broader cultural issue that needed systematic attention. He shared his son's calculations about the potential financial impact of lost customers and damaged reputation, numbers that made Martinez visibly uncomfortable. The conversation took an interesting turn when David began discussing his own business, philosophy, and the lessons he had learned about customer service over the years. He told Martinez about the hospital janitor and teenage intern whose insights had led to million-dollar innovations, emphasizing how easily valuable customers and ideas could be overlooked when businesses made assumptions based on appearances. Martinez found himself taking notes as David explained how treating everyone with respect wasn't just morally right, but also financially smart. In today's connected world, negative experiences spread quickly through social media and online reviews, potentially affecting hundreds of future customers. Meanwhile, positive experiences with younger buyers could create loyal customers for decades. The meeting was interrupted when Henderson knocked on the door, asking to speak with Martinez privately. The sales manager looked worried and seemed to be hoping for damage control, but Martinez told him they would discuss his situation later. David could see that Henderson was beginning to realize his job might be in jeopardy. After Henderson left, Martinez made a decision that surprised David. Rather than just disciplining the sales manager, he wanted to use this incident as a catalyst for comprehensive changes throughout the dealership. He asked David if he would be willing to help design a new customer service training program based on his business experience and insights. David was intrigued by this proposal, but he had conditions. Any changes had to be genuine and long-lasting, not just temporary fixes to avoid bad publicity. The training program would need to address unconscious bias, respect for all customers, and the business value of inclusive practices. Most importantly, the changes would need to be measured and monitored over time to ensure they actually worked. Martinez agreed immediately, recognizing that this was an opportunity to transform a serious problem into a competitive advantage. Other dealerships in the area were struggling with similar customer service issues, so Premier Auto Gallery could distinguish itself by genuinely embracing inclusive practices. The conversation then turned to Henderson's fate. David made it clear that he wasn't seeking revenge or trying to get anyone fired, but he also couldn't ignore the impact of the sales manager's behavior on his sons and other customers. The decision about Henderson's employment should be based on whether he could genuinely change his approach and become part of the solution. Martinez explained that Henderson would be suspended pending a full investigation of his customer interactions. If he remained with the company, it would only be after completing extensive retraining and demonstrating a real commitment to treating all customers respectfully. His future performance would be closely monitored, with particular attention to how he handled younger customers and those who might not look like traditional luxury car buyers. David appreciated this balanced approach, which focused on accountability and improvement rather than just punishment. He shared a story from his own company about an employee who had made serious mistakes but had worked hard to learn from them and eventually became one of their best performers. People could change if they were genuinely motivated to do so. The meeting concluded with Martinez committing to several specific actions. Henderson would be immediately suspended and required to complete sensitivity training before returning to work. All sales staff would participate in new customer service workshops that emphasized respect and inclusion. Customer feedback systems would be improved to catch these problems earlier. Most importantly, management would regularly monitor interactions. To ensure the changes were being implemented, David also made his own commitment. Instead of taking his business elsewhere, he would give Premier Auto Gallery a chance to prove they could change. He would bring Jake back to purchase his car from them, but only after the new training program was in place and he was confident the experience would be positive. 3 weeks later, Jake walked back into Premier Auto Gallery with his father. The difference was immediately apparent. The staff had been through David's customer service workshop, and Henderson had been replaced by a new sales manager who treated them both with genuine respect and professionalism. Jake's car buying experience this time was everything it should have been from the beginning. The sales team listened to his research, answered his questions thoroughly, and made him feel valued as a customer. When he drove off the lot in his new car, he felt proud and respected rather than humiliated. But the real measure of success came over the following months. Online reviews of Premier Auto Gallery began to improve dramatically. Customers started commenting on how welcoming and professional the staff had become. Young buyers, in particular, mentioned feeling respected and valued throughout their experience. Martinez sent David quarterly reports showing increased customer satisfaction scores and improved sales figures. The dealership had turned their customer service problem into a competitive advantage, attracting buyers who had heard about their commitment to treating everyone fairly. David used this experience as a case study in his business presentations, showing how addressing discrimination wasn't just the right thing to do, but also the smart thing to do. Companies that treated all customers with respect could tap into markets that their competitors were ignoring. The incident also became a valuable learning experience for Jake and Alex. They had seen firsthand how problems could be addressed constructively when approached with facts, professionalism, and a focus on solutions rather than blame. David's response had shown them that standing up for principles didn't require anger or vindictiveness, just persistence and clear communication. Most importantly, the experience had reinforced the family's core values about treating everyone with dignity, regardless of their background or appearance. Jake carried this lesson with him to college, where he became involved in student organizations focused on equality and inclusion. Henderson eventually found work at another dealership, where his experience at Premier Auto Gallery had taught him valuable lessons about assumptions and respect. While he never became a champion of inclusive customer service, he never again dismissed customers based on their age or appearance. The story of what happened at Premier Auto Gallery became something of a legend in the local business community, showing how one family's principled response to discrimination had transformed an entire company's culture and created lasting positive change for countless future customers.